Hey and welcome back. And in this lesson, we're going to look at animation and keyframes in Blender. And we're also going to have a quick look at the graph editor, just an overview of the graph editor. So first of all, let's look at how you can add keyframes and how you can animate certain objects in your scene. So I'm just going to delete the light and the camera as usual. So I'm going to just select the light and the camera, press X and then click to confirm. And then we're just going to leave this cube and I'm going to show you how to add basic keyframes to this cube. So as you can see right here at the bottom, we have this kind of timeline that you can drag. So you can see the frame numbers. And then here on the right hand side, you can see the start and the end of your animation. So here you can set the amount of frames that you want in your animation. So currently it's set to from 1 to 250. So I'm going to increase or decrease the end. So I only have around 100 frames. So I'm going to click here and then I'm just going to type 100 to set 100 frames. And you can see if I drag this up a little bigger so we can see what's going on, you can see that it's now highlighting from frame number 1 to frame 100. So that's fine. So here at the bottom, you can also use the same keys or the same navigation controls that you use in your 3D viewport. So if I hold in the middle mouse button, I can move this around like panning. And then if I hold in control with the middle mouse button, I can zoom in and out like that. And then you can also hold in shift with middle mouse, and that's going to do the same thing as just holding the middle mouse button just to pan around, because obviously we can't really orbit in a 3D view here, so you only have those two controls, just panning and then zooming. So let's go back to the first frame. So you can use these controls to go back to the first frame, or you can also use the shortcut shift and then left arrow on your keyboard, and that's going to take you back to the first frame. So let's say we want to just add a simple position and rotation, or just a position animation on this cube. So I'm going to move this. I'm going to press G on the keyboard to grab this cube, and then I'm going to press X to just move in the X direction, and I'm just going to put the cube somewhere like there. And then with this cube selected, I want to insert a keyframe. So with the cube selected, I'm going to press I on the keyboard, I for insert, and that's going to bring up this insert keyframe menu. So as you can see here, we've got different keyframes that we can create: location, rotation, scaling, and then location and rotation and scale, etc. So many different options. So you can go ahead and specify, do you only want to insert a keyframe for the location of this cube, rotation, scaling, or all the other combinations. So for this one, I'm just going to click on location. I just want to insert a keyframe on location. And now if we drag this keyframe or this timeline here at the bottom, I'm just going to drag this to around frame 30. And then I'm going to move this cube just to maybe the center as well, or somewhere around the center. So I'm going to press G on the keyboard and then X again to just bring it back to the center. And then I'm going to press I again and then click on location. So now if we scrub between these 2 points, you will see that that animation has been saved. And for some reason, it's not showing the keyframes now. I just want to zoom in. Okay, it's just out of the screen. So there you can see I just kind of panned up and down here. So you can see we have a keyframe on frame 1, and then also we have a keyframe on frame 30. So now I can go maybe to frame 50, and I can move this around. So I'm going to press G on the keyboard. I'm just going to drag it out to here. Not going to worry about which axis. And now I can see it's not creating a keyframe yet. We have to press I on the keyboard, and then we have to specify what type of keyframe we're going to create. So let's create another location keyframe, and you'll see it's going to create a keyframe here in this timeline. So now we can play it back from frame 1. So just hit space on the keyboard to play back. And then you can see we have our basic animation. And it's just going to keep looping. So what you can also do is you can drag these keyframes around. So let's say you want to have this keyframe and this keyframe spaced out a little bit further. You can simply just click on one of these keyframes and just drag them around to where you want them, to what keyframe you want to set them to. And that will just kind of slow down that specific animation between those two keyframes. You can also go in here and you can delete a keyframe. So I can select this keyframe at frame 30, press X on the keyboard, and then just delete keyframes. And now it's going to go straight from frame 1 to this keyframe on frame 80. So I'm going to delete all these keyframes. I'm just going to drag a box around them and then press X and then just click on delete keyframes. And let's do something a little different. So I'm going to put this cube back in the center. So with this cube selected, I'm going to go Object, Snap, and then Selection to Cursor, just to snap our cube back to the 3D cursor, which is in the center. And that's going to snap our cube back to there. So another thing that you can do is you can enable auto keyframes. So here at the bottom, you'll see this little round circle, auto keying. Now, if you enable this, then it will automatically insert keyframes when you move or rotate or scale your specific object. So let me show you how that works. So if we enable this, we always need to set a keyframe manually first, because if I just going to go to frame 10 now and I move this cube away, it's only going to set a keyframe on frame 10. So in order to set a keyframe on the first frame, I'm just going to press I, and then I'm going to set a keyframe location, rotation, and scale, because we want to use all three those transform ways to set a keyframe. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to set a keyframe. And then I'm going to go to frame number 20 here in the timeline, and I'm just going to hit G on the keyboard just to move my cube to the side. And as you can see, it automatically created this keyframe here on frame 20. So we didn't need to press I to insert that keyframe. So I'm going to go ahead and on frame 20, I'm going to rotate this cube as well. So just pressing R and just rotating it like that. And let's maybe scale this down as well. So I'm going to press S for scale and then just scale this down to something like that. So now if we go back to frame 1, so I'm going to use the shortcut, Shift and then left arrow. And if we play that back, hitting space, you can see that it's doing the rotation and the scale and the location of this cube. So now we can go ahead and we can maybe go back to, or let's go to frame 50, and we can move the cube to that side, rotate it again, scale it again. And as you can see, it's automatically inserting that keyframe. And now we can play back our animation. And you can see that's working. So another thing that you can do in this timeline, you can copy and paste some of these keyframes. So I can go ahead and I can copy this keyframe at frame 20. So just selecting it like that. And then I'm going to press Control C to copy. And now I can go to, let's say, frame 80, and I can paste it there. Control V, and it's going to paste that keyframe, the same keyframe that it had at frame 20. It's going to paste it at frame 80. And now if we play this back, you'll see that it's going to go to that location, to there, and then it's going to go back to that keyframe that we copied. So this is also a very good way just to copy and paste keyframes from your animation and then to use them like that. So another thing that you can do, let me just delete all these keyframes. So I'm just going to press X, delete, and I'm going to start with a new scene. So I'm just going to go File, New, General. Don't want to save that. And let's delete our light and camera first. And another way that you can insert keyframes is with the properties panel here on the side. So if you look at your object properties, so I'm going to select this cube, and then you can see under the object properties, you have your location and your rotation and your scale. So obviously you can drag and change these properties here. So I'm going to undo that. But what you can also do is you can set keyframes right here inside this object properties. So let me show you what I mean. So let's say we want to have an animation of this cube moving from the center and maybe just moving to this side of the screen. So what I can do is next to location, I can click these little dots to insert keyframes. So if I click that, you'll see it's going to create this little shape, and it's going to go yellow, and that means there's a keyframe now on the x-axis of the location. So I'm going to do the same with the y and the z, and you can see a keyframe was added here on our timeline. So now I can go to, let's say, frame 50, and I can move my cube in the y direction. So I'm going to press G and then Y, just pull that out to there, and now we can go ahead and we can set new keyframes. So you can currently see that X and Z did not change at all because we are still on 0 meters on the X axis, and also the same with the Z. So technically we can only create a keyframe on the Y axis to create this animation. So you can tick or just click that to set that keyframe. Or what I usually do is I just click all three of them to be sure that those values will be set as a keyframe. So now if we go back to frame 1 and I play this back, you'll see that we have that animation. So let's say we want to add a rotation to that animation. So I'm going to go back to the first frame. And then with this cube selected, in the properties of the object properties, I can now set a keyframe next to the rotation as well. So I can click these little dots next to rotation. And now I can go to frame 50. And I want to add a rotation on the Z axis. So what I can do is I can either type in a degree here. So I can just click there and say 180. Press enter. And you're not going to see anything happening here because it's actually rotating exactly 180 degrees. So it looks the same, but it's actually rotated. And now I'm going to click this little keyframe button just to set a keyframe on the Z rotation. So now if we go back to frame 1 and we play this back, you'll see that we have that 180 degree rotation. So you can do the same with scale. So I'm going to go back to frame 1 and then I'm going to set a keyframe for both X, Y, Z on the scale. So just tick, tick, tick. And then I'm going to go to frame 50 and then I'm maybe just going to scale this up to like 1.5 on all the axes. So 1.5, 1.5. And then I'm just going to set a keyframe again. Just click that. And now if we play this back, you'll see that we have that scale as well. So you can always go in here and maybe in the center, maybe frame 25, let's set the scale to 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. And then we're going to tick these boxes to set those keyframes. And now you can see that it's going from big to small and then to big. Now let's have a look at the graph editor quickly. So currently, as you can see, this window here at the bottom, if I click on this icon right here in the corner, that is currently set to timeline. You can see there's a little clock, so that's the timeline. And we're going to change this to graph editor. So you can just simply click on graph editor there and it's going to take you into the graph editor. Now this is kind of similar, but it gives you a lot more information and data than the normal timeline editor. So you can use your middle mouse button to pan around and then you can hold in control and then you can zoom left and right and also up and down. And now you can see all these different curves that our animation is actually using. So what you can do is here on the left hand side, you can see we have our cube and then you can see we have cube action and below that we have the transform. So if I expand this transform, you can see all those different keyframes. So you can see the 3 location keyframes, the 3 rotation keyframes, and then also the 3 scale keyframes. So what you can do is you can switch some of them off if you only want to focus maybe on the 3 location. So I can enable those 3, and this will give you only the rotation keyframes. So I'm going to zoom in here slightly so we can see this a bit better. So now you can see that the green line is actually the key or the axis that is changing. And if you look in on the side here, you can see green, that is the X location. And that is exactly what's happening here. So you can see that is our Y axis and our cube is moving from the middle towards the Y axis, as you can see there. So you'll see it's got these handles, almost like a Bezier curve. So what you can do is you can simply click on this keyframe right there, and you can use the same controls that you're using in your viewport to move, rotate, and scale. So to move it, I'm going to press G on the keyboard to grab, and you can see that I can move that keyframe around to anywhere I want to. You can also hold in control to snap. So the nice thing about Blender is it's using the same shortcut keys, doesn't matter which window you are in. So even using these curves, it will use the same shortcuts. So you can also change these handles. So I can click on one of these handles and then press G on the keyboard, and that's going to change the curve that I'm using, as you can see there. Also click on this one and then click on this handle, press G on the keyboard to move that one around. So currently, as you can see, if I play this back, I'm just going to set my end frame on about 50. So I'm going to go back to timeline quickly and just set my end frames to 50. And then I'm going to go back to the graph editor. So now if we play this back, you'll see that the movement starts off slow and then it goes quicker and then it kind of ends slowly again. So let's say you want to have a constant speed of your animation between two of your keyframes. So that will be the handle type. So all of these keyframes has a specific handle type set. So I'm going to right click on this keyframe right here at the end, and you can see that we have handle type. So currently that's set to something like aligned or maybe even automatic, and I'm going to set that to vector. And as you can see there, it's got a very sharp corner. So I'm going to click vector, and now I can see there's no curve right here with this one keyframe. So I'm going to do the same on this one. So the beginning one, I'm going to right click on that one, and let me just see if I can select that. I'm going to hide the X and the Z because we're not using them, and then I'm going to right click on that keyframe, handle type, and then I'm going to set that to vector. Now I can see we have this straight line. So if I play this back, you can see that our cube is now moving at a constant speed. So no curves, nothing like that. And let's say you want to have a curve again on one of these, you can simply just select that keyframe, right click, handle type, and then change it to maybe something like automatic, and you'll see that that curve will come back. You can also use the shortcut key, of course, which is V for that handle. So you just select that keyframe and then you press V on the keyboard, and it's going to come up with this menu showing you which one do you want to choose. So I'm going to set this one to automatic as well. And there you can see we have that nice curve back to our, or between those two keyframes. So let's quickly look at the rotation keyframes. So I'm going to hide this Y location just by clicking on this I, and then for the rotation, I'm going to enable them. So there you can see we have one curve that goes up because we're only rotating on that one axis, and that's the blue. So if you look at the blue here, it actually shows us that it is the Z rotation that we are using. So we can go ahead and we can hide the X rotation and the Y rotation as we're not using them. And now we can see that that is our rotation curve. So what you can do with these keyframes, you can also use the axis shortcut. So let's say I want to move this keyframe around. I can press G on the keyboard and then I can freely move it. But then if I press Y, it will only move in the Y axis, basically up and down. Or if I press X, it will only go sideways. So obviously you can't press Z because there's no third axis when you're looking at a graph. It's just a flat 2D graph. So it's basically Y and then X. You can also do things like scale. So let's say we have another keyframe maybe right there. So I'm going to set a keyframe on that same rotation. So I'm just going to press I on the keyboard and then just rotation. So you can see we inserted a new keyframe right there. So what we can do is we can either select both those keyframes by holding in Shift, and then we can move them around by pressing G, or I can press R on the keyboard for rotation, and as you can see I can rotate around those two keyframes, or I can press S to scale. So you can see I can scale those two keyframes. So everything you're using in your viewport, you can try and use those same keys in the graph editor, which is really, really nice. So let's say I only want to move this handle up and down. I can press G and then Y, and that will only allow me to move it up and down in a straight line, which is pretty cool. And that's the basics of adding keyframes and animation to your objects inside of Blender. play around with this and see if you can just create some nice basic animation. I will suggest trying like something like a bouncing ball. There are quite a few tutorials on just the basics, how that actually work, but you can go ahead and you can try and create a normal sphere and then try animating that sphere so it's kind of bouncing on something, maybe just a normal plane, and see if you can create like where it touches the ground, it actually squashes the sphere down a little bit, and see if you can create a realistic bouncing ball. That's always a very good example to try and create your first animation. So see how that goes, and I will see you in the next lesson.